So some of my old friends live in big cities that are the epicenters of the coronavirus outbreak here in the US. So on our last flex day or day off at the Abbey, I reached out to find out how they were doing. So most of them wrote to say how grateful they are to have their lives, their families, and their jobs. And two responses left an impression on me that I'd like to share. So one friend who has visited the Abbey said, "I've definitely been thinking about the Abbey lately. This seems like an ideal time to rethink what aspects of one's life are truly important to achieving happiness and fulfillment." Yes, for someone from the Overachievers Club. With so many worldly things being out of reach right now. For example, restaurants, sports, other events, dating, etc. And another friend wrote, "I'm wondering about the balance between psychological and physical well-being as this quarantine and isolation goes on for most of the world. In a way, perhaps a monastic practice is the best preparation for a scenario like what we are facing. We talk a lot about how this entire pandemic is a way to enforce a global pause or slowing down, if that is even possible, to consider a more ethical way of being with the world and sharing resources with each other." So I was quite moved to receive these responses, knowing that these friends were taking this privilege of being able to stay home at this point to reflect. So really all of us can use this privilege wisely to think about what is truly important in life and what it means to be ethical in this world. So as a Buddhist nun, not a scientist or a politician, I have been thinking about the coronavirus pandemic from an ethical perspective, just trying to think about how the causes of the pandemic and how it has unfolded worldwide might be viewed through the framework of the 5 precepts that are the foundation of Buddhist ethics. So our first precept here is not to kill or to respect life, right? And I think by now we've all heard the term zoonotic disease, right? That the COVID-19 is a disease that is passed from animals to humans, like MERS, SARS, Ebola, HIV. And these diseases have been spreading because people are encroaching more and more on animal habitats and engaging in the wildlife trade. So really at the heart of why we're falling sick, to me anyway, is a lack of respect for life. And I bring this up not to promote like a blame and shame approach to protecting animals and the environment, which is, I don't believe that's sustainable. I remember reading that China has placed a ban on the wildlife trade, but it's a billion-dollar industry, so it's not going to disappear because of a law. Yeah, many other things need to happen to find viable alternatives. So instead, what I've been thinking about is the efforts of conservation groups like the Jane Goodall Institute that take a more holistic approach. So the Jane Goodall Institute started out with the mission to protect chimpanzees and their habitats, but they quickly saw that they had to also work with the human communities that live near the chimpanzees, because until people who are poaching and engaging in deforestation need to do that as a way of life or for their survival, they're not going to stop. And they found too that until the poor have access to clean water, proper nutrition, and healthcare and education, I mean, why would they care about saving monkeys, right? They're trying to protect their own children. So the Jane Goodall Institute has expanded its mission. I think they also work on sustainable development goals. So I just thought that was a really good example of how to help one group, like the chimpanzees, it involves like a whole ecosystem of different parties because we're all interdependent. So in that sense, for me, respecting life connects to the next precept, which is not to steal or to respect others' resources. And this is a heavy precept because when we steal others' resources that they need for survival, then that leads to their death. So here we can see that sharing resources is essential for sustaining life. And in this pandemic context, I've been thinking a lot about the importance of equal access to healthcare. And we've seen that countries with universal healthcare systems have done a lot better. Right? Simply because in these countries, people don't have to worry about whether they can pay for treatment. I think in most parts of the world, testing is now free if you can get access to it. But then there's the question of whether you have to pay to get treated, right? So if you have to pay and you can't afford it, you're less likely to come forward and get tested. And often in countries with universal healthcare systems, then there are other systems too to say provide paid leave if you have to be quarantined. You're not sick, right? But you've been exposed, you need to stay home. Or in some cases, the government gives an allowance to people who are self-employed. So we can see, it's like a virtuous cycle. Yeah, in a system like that, people want to get tested, cases are picked up early and they can be treated before they become fatal. Whereas in a system where access to healthcare is unequal, then we see people are slow to get tested, they're worried about how to pay, and meanwhile disease just spreads in the community, and then by the time the cases are picked up, they are severe, and this overwhelms the medical system. So data is starting to come out in the US too, that this pandemic is disproportionately affecting minorities that are more likely to be poor. For instance, 60% of those who have died of COVID-19 in Louisiana are Black, even though they make up about 30% of the state's population. So those are the stats I saw on their health department website yesterday. So, I would guess one of the reasons for this is that this is a population that already doesn't have proper access to healthcare and has more underlying health conditions. So I think as scientists race to develop a vaccine or a treatment, it's really important to think about how to make access to it equitable worldwide. This is a big moral issue for all of us, in the coming years. And I mean, with so many epidemics, we've seen that, for instance, with HIV/AIDS, right, millions of people have died and continue to die in impoverished nations, even though the antiretroviral therapy is available and it can keep people alive. So, a cure is not the silver bullet. Access to it will be the essential issue. So that also takes me to our third precept, which is not to engage in unwise and unkind sexual relationships. But here, I think we can think about this more in terms of the importance of cultivating respectful relationships. And I think that's played a big part too in affecting how people are responding to this pandemic. The other day on Sunday at Sharing the Dharma Day, Venerable was saying, we're in uncharted waters and there's no playbook. Maybe my cynical mind says, there is an old playbook for epidemics, and we've already seen it happen. It's called blame the foreigner or blame the minority. That's the first thing you do. You find someone to blame, right? But I think the real tragedy of that is that you become blind to how a disease is infectious and spreads to anyone, right? Often we've seen again and again, once you blame people from one country, you're only screening for people who've come from that country and so forth, and you neglect that the disease is spreading in the majority. So, I mean, this has happened with HIV/AIDS in many places too. Yeah, and then you have this wrong view that it only affects that minority group of people, doesn't affect us. It's a disease. It affects human bodies, period. It does not choose. So we see that many countries now have large outbreaks that only screen specific people, and then did not trace the spread of disease within the local community. I read in the New York Times too a piece about just questioning the ethics of thinking, this disease is mainly fatal for the elderly and those with underlying health conditions. So does that mean it's okay for people in that group to die? Right? Because I think a lot of people at the beginning were like, meh, it doesn't affect me. But it's like, wait, it's affecting some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Shouldn't we do something? Yeah, and thankfully, people's minds have shifted. So many of us are now staying at home or sheltering in place. A big piece of that is to protect vulnerable people. So it's really important that as we try and get ourselves out of this situation, that people think of how to work with each other. I think all of us are collectively grieving, seeing our leaders fight with each other, politicians at all levels, mayors, governors, the president, all not agreeing. And I think too, the US government, has been hampered by lack of respectful relationships for a long time. That's why so many vacancies are in the government. I don't know, I haven't read the news in a long time. Okay, so I'm like, what? All these key functions are vacant? What's going on? I was really shocked to read that the head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is that what it stands for, FEMA? He took office in January 14th, 2020. What a terrifying time to start your new job. When you're you don't even have those networks and a base, it takes all of us who work know, it takes you at least 1 year or so to just get your feet wet. And here he is, smack in the middle of this huge crisis. Yeah. So it's really important that we nurture trustworthy relationships over time. And, we just have to start now. And I'm thinking about this in the context of the US and China as well. I've read in some of the international press that actually the US and China have collaborated closely to fight epidemic disease since the SARS outbreak in 2002. So there's been a close relationship of scientists working together, sharing data. So it's really unfortunate that this relationship seems to have degenerated at the time when it's needed most, down to the point of, it's a bit like two small children, as Venerable often says, in a sandbox, right? You started it. No, you started it. It's like, please stop. So, for the world to get out of this, we really need everybody to cooperate. This is not the time to throw sand in each other's eyes. And then the fourth precept that we have, not to lie, to uphold truth. Yeah, I think what's been disturbing too is to see how we've had a lot of setbacks in response time because the people who are trying to tell the truth about this pandemic wound up being punished. Yeah, whether it was doctors in China who were raising the alarm and got silenced by their government, or even doctors in the US saying, hey, we don't have enough protective equipment and getting fired. Right? People trying to save life, trying to speak the truth, and then for all kinds of other afflictive reasons, they get silenced. And that just harms everybody else. We've seen too that I think countries that have tested in a widespread manner and are honest about the numbers have been effective in isolating and treating people who are sick and tracking cases down and quarantining people who are exposed. Yeah. So it seems that I don't know that much about the World Health Organization. I think people are, there's criticism and praise, both sides. But what they've been saying repeatedly is the importance of tracing, testing, and treating every case. And that seems to have worked in countries with low death rates. They're not promoting medicines that have not been properly tested and can have serious side effects. I was thinking the head of the WHO must be so bored. All these people are like, what is the solution? He's like, trace, test, treat, trace, test, treat, find a way to do it. Like right now, there seems to be no other way till a vaccine is found. Yeah, so I think it's really important that we listen to scientists and physicians whose motivation is to save lives, and not politicians whose idea of investing in healthcare might be buying private stocks in pharmaceutical companies. And the last precept, the fifth, is not to take intoxicants, right? And conversely, to cultivate a clear and compassionate mind. I will say, initially, when I first saw the pictures of college students on a beach in Florida during a pandemic, I was really very dismayed. I was wondering, is this the outcome of American higher education? Which I am a product of as well. Just the way I was reading it was like, wow, it's like a picture of an elite that's intoxicated with its own pleasure, that is just so ignorant about public affairs. Right? Because if you truly believe you're immune as a young person, then you should be giving blood and volunteering, instead of partying on the beach, right? Like, use your immunity well. So anyhow, before I get on my moral high horse, I think one way we can work against this intoxication is to use this time to get educated ourselves. And we can learn more about global health issues, public health issues. I know it is not the most exciting topic you necessarily want to read about right now, but what better time to learn? And one of the best courses I took at college was actually on medical anthropology, which was about how different cultures handle human health and disease. And one book I would highly recommend from that course that we read was a book called Mountains Beyond Mountains. It's by a journalist called Tracy Kidder. And it's a biography of Dr. Paul Farmer, who is an infectious diseases doctor. And he's dedicated his life to raising the standard of healthcare in impoverished countries. And he and his friends founded a nonprofit called Partners in Health to do this. And what I appreciate about the book, it's very much about how to work at the community level. How he's also very religious, so how he incorporated his own spiritual beliefs into his work. And it shows us how public health, social justice, and environmentalism are all deeply interconnected. And I think that's good news, because it means that if you resolve some of the problems in one area, it creates like a virtuous cycle. It will have its ripple effect in a positive way. So I wanted to end with a hopeful story from the work of Dr. Paul Farmer, where in 2010 there was an earthquake in Haiti, as many of you know, that killed 250,000 people and left 1.3 million people homeless. And at the same time, I think it was the UN forces that brought a cholera outbreak to the area as well. So while these people were coming in trying to help, then they brought an infectious disease that had never been in Haiti. So you can imagine the devastation. And at the same time, too, it seems the World Health Organization ruled out giving an oral vaccine as being not cost effective. So that cost thousands of lives. So, of course, partners in health did not give up. They continued to work with their partners. They worked very closely with the Haitian Ministry of Health and another NGO. It took them 1.5 years to roll out this vaccine for cholera and treat whoever they could. And at the same time, they had been planning to build a teaching hospital in Haiti. So, with the earthquake, they were thinking, what are we going to do, right? In fact, by 2012, with the help of donors and partners from all over the US, they were able to build a 205,000 square foot solar-powered medical center, 3 times the size of what they planned for. The architect, I think the builders, all contributed their skills and their time freely, wanting to help. And so today, they continue to they're training Haitian doctors in their own country to be the next generation of social justice doctors. And around the hospital, there are shops and other industries that are starting to grow. So, out of incredible suffering can come great good. So let's all not lose hope or fall into despair or distress, but, just to look closely at what's happening around us and to think carefully about the kind of future we want to create. And for me personally, I believe it starts with keeping good ethical conduct, starting with the 5 precepts. And that benefits not just ourselves and others around us in this life, but in all future lives to come.